Hello, everybody. This is a video review of Chapter 5, where we start talking a little bit about consumer behavior, which is kind of how psychology and how people's wants and norms play a role in the world of advertising. So this video is going to cover a little bit about the 4 stages of consumer decision making. We'll talk about the process, the involvement, the experiences, communication of those brand influences. Once again, psychology involved a lot in this. Interactions with cultural influences in advertising, some sociological factors, and then talk a little bit about a transmission model that the book presents kind of at the end of there. So start off here, consumers, decision making, the idea that a message has to get transformed from you, the advertiser, to the person on the other end. So they talk about the 4 stages of that it kind of all begins with someone realizing that they need something, whatever that might be, that it's a functional, emotional, that there's some hole that they need to try and fill with themselves. And they're going to try and do it with something, a service, a product, hopefully the product we're selling them. So they go out into stage 2 and they start looking for alternatives. They start looking through what's available, trying to find as much possible information as they can to make sure that they make a good informed decision about what they need. And then once we get to the evaluation stage, hopefully they follow it up with a purchase. Stage 3, that's kind of where we're at. And finally, stage 4, the post-purchase, are you happy? This is where buyer's remorse kind of comes in a lot. I know that's actually something I have a problem with. I think I want something and I get it and I have it in my hand and it's like, oh, maybe I didn't want this as much as I wanted to, or maybe this thing just doesn't work the way it was, I thought it was going to work for me. So this is kind of how the book lays it out here from left to right: need recognition, info search, purchase, post-purchase. I'm actually not a huge fan of this particular model. And I'll tell you one reason is because, and a lot of books do this, that they kind of forget the fact that it's a never-ending circle. So what this really should be is, if you were to look at this, you would see that there should be another arrow that comes back and feeds back in. And this is called the feedback loop of marketing, because after a post-purchase and evaluation, that's where people look. Does this product meet my needs? Does it not meet my needs? So this whole process is a big loop, and the consumer decision-making process should never end. So even after someone buys your product, your job isn't done. It's to help them realize that they need to buy your product or some other version of your product to go along with it. So it's a very important kind of thing to remember, something the book doesn't really talk about, but in the world of marketing, in the world of advertising, it's helpful to know. So here's an example the book lays out for us with Joy and dish soap, P&G, Procter & Gamble product. That here in Japan, that they have a changing culture. That there was a lot, I think it was a lot more meat was being used, and it changed how things were being cooked, and means people were scrubbing harder. So Procter & Gamble came up with a dish detergent that was specifically tailored for their Japanese market. Now, it's actually kind of important to note, like, they wouldn't have been able to, go back and do that if they weren't doing that evaluation process at the end. And the marketing of it actually is what resulted in the need recognition at the beginning. So it's kind of a good example of how that loop would close itself, go back to the end, or go from the end back to the beginning to help close that loop. It's part of the product development process for every company and every product that's made. So decision making, how are people make their decisions? It's kind of evolved. I do like the way the book laid this out and the 4 quadrants that kind of go into this, and we'll give you some examples here in a second. But this idea that it's not a simple process. Well, it can be a simple process actually, but it changes by product, by how important something is to you, how much you need it, and how much emphasis you actually put on that choice. Is it something you care about? So leads us to the little example here. You have your upper left-hand corner, extended problem solving. Has high involvement, but low experience. It's not something I do a lot, but it's something that's really important to me. To me, this is like a car, right? So if I'm up here in this area, it's something that's really important to me. It's going to have a lot of money, but it's not something I'm normally used to. So you can have that extended problem-solving experience. It's going to take me a while to get out and see what options are available to me. Next quadrant over here are limited problem-solving. This could be things like, it's not important to me and it doesn't take a lot for me to do it. Well, this might be something like, I think of like those random batteries that you may need. One of my daughter's toys needs an L44, like one of those little round discs batteries. Okay, it's something I can go out and grab. Do I care the difference between an Energizer and a Rayovac or whatever kind of different brands may be out there? Not really, and it's not something I'm going to put a lot of time into, but I'm going to grab it and I'm going to go. Brand loyalty, high experience. I use something a lot, and it has, the involvement is going to be high on that as well. So this might be something like, soaps. I think that's what the book talks about. This is something that I use a lot. We all get in our little routines of the products that we like. So, I'm going to become loyal to that brand, and it's what I'm going to buy from now on. Habits, though. This is kind of takes it to the next step. That, you might have habit stuff that, like maybe Starbucks. I think that's another thing that the book talks about, that, I'm not going to break from those habits because I built them over time. It's what I'm used to. So 4 different quadrants to kind of make up that decision-making model process. Okay, as we go through kind of this idea of consumer behavior, it really relies on this idea that, like, what people believe is, what really drives their decision making, what drives their attitudes. If I think something about a product, if I think that Starbucks coffee tastes better, then it's going to drive how I purchase my coffee from then on. If I believe my laundry soap is a superior laundry soap than the competition, then that's going to drive my thought process about that. I kind of use the example too, like think about people that are, heavy, like Ford people or Chevy people. You can't tell them that the other brand is better for whatever reason. They're always going to come up with some sort of reason why not. We're actually going to talk about that more here in a couple slides as well. But using the model kind of that's at the top, and using the model at the bottom, we try to use that and leverage that to try and create an ad. So we start in the in the beginning, the criteria, what might be a relevant brand. Then we start asking them to rate. Once we get those ratings and how people see one thing versus another things, we can help to understand what they believe and why they believe it. And once I know that, I can create some sort of promotional or advertisement that will help leverage what people already may believe. So I can, if people understand or believe one thing, I can show them proof. I can show testimonials that says, yes, this is better. I can show them, an example of how something might work that's better to help support their beliefs to get them to buy what I'm looking for them to buy. Psychological processes, really pay attention to, as you're trying to deliver your messages, to what people's reactions are. It's kind of what we just talked about, right? Because once again, if people believe one thing, they're going to be predetermined to not believe that the competition may not be what you're looking for. So in order to get a customer to pay attention, you want to offer something that's interesting. That's, we get a lot of advertising, the visual, the slightly odd or off kind of representation of an ad, something with a lot of color, helps them understand, comprehend that message that you're seeing. Then once they start looking at it, they can start accepting that message. They can start seeing it for what it is. And if you're good enough at this, what you're really trying to get to is that they remember that. We say retain that. But in, the next day, the water cooler talk, hey, did you see that commercial? Or did you see this interesting thing on TV? Or, when you're watching TV or looking at an ad or online, it's a thing that you grab your significant other and you say, hey, come look at this. You're going to share that interaction with someone. So the more that you can get that to apply, the better you're going to be in the long run for any advertising you do. Book uses this example too. I think it's interesting, although I wish it would have been drawn slightly different, in that I wish the roads would have curved towards the center like this, because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to the same point. You're just taking a different path. So instead of going away from each other, I wish they were curving into the same point. The central route, obviously it's the easy route. If someone's paying attention to what you're doing, if they have high involvement in your product, in your idea, it's going to lead quicker to some sort of response, because they have your attention. But that's not how marketing works for the most part. Most part in today's world, there's a lot of stimulus out there, messages get lost. So you tend to end up on the peripheral route. That you're trying to, it's the reason you see the same commercials over and over and over again on TV, right? That those commercials are there. They're trying to get you to notice little bits of it, and to the point that you can almost memorize what they're saying. And if they can do that, they have some sort of reaction from you in the long term as well. So consuming in the real world, it's not always easy. That, like I mentioned, there's just a lot of messages out there, and also people have different ideas, different understandings of products and services. Things like cultures, that we talked about earlier about dish liquids in Japan versus the U.S. Different attitudes, different rituals, different products that they're dealing with. So how an advertiser is going to leverage those is going to be different depending on where they're at. So it's very much by product. This is where market research comes in to help understand things like the 4 Ps, which you've kind of talked about already. How did those help promote your brand? Once you know those values within a culture, once you know the attitudes that they drive, that's where your advertising can come in. And it's going to be driven by the pressure points, by the ideas, by the topics that actually have some sort of impact. And I do like the fact they have arrows going a bunch of different directions here, because they're all impacted on each other, right? Advertising can actually have an impact on cultural values. You can think back on examples in your life that you've seen pop culture ideas that have been driven by mass media, because that's just the way it works in today's world. The advertising can feed back into culture, into attitudes that we accept within our communities. So once again, we're in a bit of a changing world right now too. That your marketing does need to be targeted. We talked about that in the last chapter, that you need to know who's buying your product. You need to know where they're coming from and how that's going to impact their decisions. Things like race and culture that they may be coming from have different impacts on who influences them to make their decisions. So here's this little book from the graph. It's a blurry graph, but it still kind of does what we're talking about, where we were at 10 years ago for where it's kind of projected to be 30 years from now. The diversity is becoming a much bigger component of advertising, of marketing in the U.S. Even look here, higher Hispanic rates. I can even think of an example. In the last week, I was watching TV, don't really even remember what it was, but randomly a commercial in Spanish came on. So there was a 30-second spot, primetime television, something I'd never actually seen before, came on, did the commercial in Spanish, and then it transitioned back over. Why would they do that? Well, it was for a product that they were trying to target to that community, so they were trying to deliver it in a way that community would interact with it the best. Okay, so revolutions can happen too. And you kind of think no further than this idea of sustainability right at the moment too. With kind of the youth movements going on, you see political stuff all the time. Greta Thunberg, I believe her name is the like 14, 15-year-old girl from Sweden that's kind of in the news right now. I think Sweden, Norway, somewhere in Scandinavia there. But that's part of the culture that's happening on this idea of sustainability and treating our earth as best as we possibly can is very much an advertising impact. I also think of things like the fast food industry. So when I was a kid, this idea like McDonald's, like they used to run commercials all the time that was about supersize your meals. That it was about taking what probably was like a 1,200 calorie meal and let's get extra large fries and extra large drink and turn that thing into a 2,000 calorie meal for an additional like 70 cents or whatever it was. Well, if that really hasn't been there for a while. There was actually a movie came out called Super Size Me, kind of looked at some of the health benefits, or not the health benefits, the health negatives of those added calories had on someone. So the change that happened within inside of our culture is definitely recognizable in that industry and on the sustainable social industry as well. So just be on the lookout for those, that cultures do change over time. So kind of last slide here talks about the way that messages can be transmitted. And the truth is that advertisers can play a big role in how that lays out. The example that pops into my head is there's actually a documentary out right now about Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren was kind of big in the 70s, the guy that kind of turned, male fashion as a pretty important thing. We've all seen, his logo, Polo, out there. But at his time, the idea of the male suit was one thing, and he had this separate idea. So he was able to, the cultural world that was out there, he was able through fashion, through advertising, he put out a consumer good, things like wide ties, things like, color, blue blazers instead of, the traditional black and white and tweeds. And so he was able to have an impact on that. So people saw that, they saw that consumer good, they were able to take it and make it an individual value for which they had, and changed an entire industry. So you go from the top of this down at the cultural level. That good introduced a new topic, and by the end you actually had a wave that kind of transformed the industry. So it's really important to know that what people believe and what people think can actually have a huge impact on industries as a whole. And this very much plays into the idea of psychology, that people want to believe the things that they believe. They want to be supported on the ideas that they support. So if you can get them to start looking at your product as a good product, they're going to continue to see it that way. And it's going to be much harder for them to abandon your brand, to abandon your product. And this all comes back to branding, right? Why do people use the brands that they love? Because they love it, because it's worked for them. They don't see a need to change. So if you can get those companies to do that, it's all the better for you and your company and your advertising. So that is a little bit about Chapter 5. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.